So the essential elements of a risk-aware culture: committed leadership. What do I mean by that? And in this organisation, there were lots of nice statements. There was no shortage of vision, mission, values on the wall, everywhere. And they were even stated, and I've got, to be fair to this management, they seemed to believe that they wanted good risk management. Some of them even seemed to believe they had it. And they would tell me about these missions, and everyone looks about the mission. The trouble is, when we did the staff survey didn't believe it, because they were driving behaviours, they were driving models, they were driving objectives and remuneration models that were not consistent, not aligned with those values. So that's not committed leadership. Committed leadership is where you actually demonstrate what it is that you're saying. Horizontal information sharing. If something is happening in one part of the organisation, if you haven't got a culture that allows that to travel through, some of you might have been here earlier in the year when there was a presentation by BP on the work they're now doing post-Mexican Gulf. The main thing I learned out of that was that there were 7 other Mexican Gulf type, almost as big, events that had happened in the previous 8 years. They had learnt nothing horizontally across the globe from any one of those events because the information didn't travel, because the culture didn't allow it to travel. There's then got to be vertical escalation of threats and fears. People have got to be feeling free to raise things. In this organisation, the redundancy thing, for instance, information would go to one level and then it was suppressed, because they were just frightened they'd get shot at if they took it too far up the line, because they'd say, oh, you're just asking for more people. Kaboom. So the information just got suppressed. Continuous constructive challenging the organisation's actions and preconceptions. We can be locked in our mindset on how we dealt with issues last year. So when we're looking at issues that we're going to face next year, if we deal with them in the mindset we applied last year, but things have changed in the environment and processes and systems, and then we're very, very likely to be applying last year's solutions to next year's problems. So we have to be open to challenge and threat. Active learning from mistakes. Mistakes really are a gift. As long as people haven't deliberately, I don't mean to say if somebody doesn't hit their targets, you reward them. But nor, if they've done everything that they've tried to do, but they happen to have made some mistakes along the way, you don't punish them. You take those mistakes, you teach that person, and then you take that lesson to everybody else. And incentives that reward thinking about the whole organisation. So not only am I going to be rewarded about what happens on my process, but I also need to think about my process connecting to somebody else's process. If I make a decision here that's going to affect some other part of the organisation, the culture is that I make sure that other person knows about it. Pretty simple stuff. It's not rocket science. It's not locked away in scientific language. Now, just conscious of the time, I'll push through this a little more quickly. So some of the other elements, really access to authority. In very large organisations, you have lots of silos and it's very difficult to get up to that level of authority. Those in the APRA environment would be quite conscious of the fact that APRA is concerned about conflicts of interest, and so we can end up putting people in silos. The whole point, though, is to make sure you've got ways for someone who's got an issue to be able to get to the person who has that authority, whether it be the board, whether it be the CEO, whether it be the Chief Risk Officer. They need to be able to have that access to authority. So that's got to be visible. People have to know they can do that, and how do they do it, and what circumstances should they do that. Chief Risk Officers or their equivalent with extensive influence. If they don't have the power of veto, they should at least have the ability to be able to go to the board and say, there is a decision on the table at the moment and I'm, as the risk person, concerned about it, and this is why. They've discharged their function at that stage of the game. They can, if the people are still allowed to make silly decisions. But if you look at the GFC and look at the, I think it was Goldman Sachs, isn't it, that came through probably the best in the GFC, their CRO had the power of veto. That's a pretty big statement. I think you'll find that's pretty close to any one of our banks here. Communication of risk tolerance to the organisation and external parties. Funny thing happened, it was around about the time that I was doing this work for Hammond Care, and so and it happened to be relevant for them, and I picked up my iPhone during the day, and there was a Bloomberg news flash that one of the big international motor companies had just done a recall across their entire line of cars around the globe for an airbag failure. Within about 2 or 3 minutes, a second one came up, and their next door neighbour had to do the same thing. Now, most people would just think, oh, that's just a coincidence. Being the miserable sort of person I'm in, doing risk management for a living, I'll tell you what I immediately thought. They both used the same airbag manufacturer. But the airbag manufacturer's name didn't get mentioned. The only name that got mentioned was the brand that we buy. When we outsource, we hand our reputation to somebody else for safekeeping. So you want to make damn sure that their definition of your risk appetite and tolerances are the same in their organisation as they're same for you. Otherwise, you've just handed your reputation. You know, we all know who BP is. Does anyone really care who Deepwater Horizon is? There were actually only 3 BP employees on that platform.